Shalom Aleichem, Lakute Sichas, Chelek Chavtes, Volume 29, the Sicha for Haazinu. Another unbelievable Rashi Sicha. Yes, extraordinary, the precision, etc., that every Sicha brings, and you see it very much in the Rashi Sichas. So, let's bring it up, the text of it. The pasuk says in Haazinu at the end of the parsha, "Vayovam Moshe vayidaber." It's called Dibri Ashira Azois Ba'azdei Kahal Yisrael Hu V'Yisheh Benun. Moshe came and spoke to the people, him and Hosea bin Nun, which of course is a reference to Yehoshua. That's the pasuk. Moshe came and he spoke to the people, him and Yeshua bin Nun. Seems pretty straightforward, like it doesn't need any clarification. And instead, there's a long Rashi, very long Rashi. And Rashi makes 3 points. I numbered them A, B, and C. Rashi says, number one, it was a Shabbos of a pair. Authority was transferred from one to the other. It's a quote from Chazal, from our sages, Shabbos shel dibzigi, a Shabbos of a pair. Dibzigi is the word like zug, like a pair. Moshe and Yeshua. Number two, B. Moshe provided Yeshua a spokesman in his own lifetime, lest the people say later in your teacher's lifetime, you didn't raise your head. So if Yeshua doesn't have a spokesman, which means he's not yet a leader. Back in the day, a leader, a teacher, a rav, would have somebody that was his spokesman, somebody called Meturgamon, who would speak loudly to the crowds what he was saying. So if you became a real leader, you were given a spokesman. It's like equivalent today, you were given the microphone. You were given an opportunity for your voice to be heard. And so Moshe set up such a person for Joshua, for Yeshua, so that people shouldn't later say, aha, when Moshe was alive, you didn't pick up your head. You were like no one knew about you. You didn't talk. You didn't raise your voice. Suddenly you're a leader. And therefore Moshe did this in the lifetime of his own lifetime. Yehoshua was already given a spokesman. And number C, and why is he called here Hosea rather than Yehoshua? His name was changed from Hosea to Yehoshua back in Parsha Shlach in the book of Numbers when he was sent as a spy. So why here is it referencing him again as Hosea? Because he didn't become proud after he was appointed to greatness, rather he remained humble. I think the reference is that Hosea, since that was his name way back in his youth, and we're referring back to it, it's almost like, somebody's young and he's known as Moshe. And then later people call him Moshe, and then it becomes a big Rav. They refer him again as Moshe. Like he was still humble like he was from the beginning. So perhaps that's what this means, that he's now again at the end of the Torah. When Yeshua is actually appointed to greatness, he's referred to, albeit one more time, with the name Hosea, which was the name of his youth, to indicate that he didn't become a big shot. So the Rebbe's question is, why does Rashi combine these separate teachings of Chazal, and why here? These are 3 separate teachings, as we're going to see. These 3 teachings, like most things in Rashi doesn't invent them. They come from Chazal, from our sages, from classic Torah Sheba'al Peh, classic oral Torah, either the Gemara or a Medrash, sometimes Medrash Rabbah, sometimes Sifri, whatever. Those are almost every Rashi is a source in one of those classic sources. Wouldn't you know it? These 3, of course, have sources. Some of them in the Sifri, which is a Medrash, and some of them in the Gemara. But they're all 3, A, B, and C, in those sources are in different places. You're not going to find one Medrash or Gemara where it shows all these 3. They're not collected. And the reason why they're not collected is obvious, because they're 3 themes. There are 3 themes. One speaks about the joint transfer of power. One speaks about him putting up a spokesman. And C certainly is not connected to the other 2. this business with Joshua's humility. And again, in the sources, they're written in 3 places. Why would Rashi collect them in one place? And why here? Rashi's thing is that he only comments because there's something in the verse that begs explanation. That means it has to be directly related, not just to Torah in general, but to this particular verse that's problematic. As we're going to see, in the Talmudic and in the Chazal and the statements of our sages, these 3 are primarily not brought related to this verse. At least 2 out of the 3 are brought in other verses. So why would Rashi bring them here and collect them from 3 different places in the writings of the sages? It's almost like Rashi created a new commentary, namely a compilation of 3 separate commentaries that are in 3 different verses in the Torah, in the writings of the sages. And Rashi decides, no, they all belong together and they belong here. Like, why? Why doesn't he just follow the model of the sages? Especially, says the Rebbe, the question is even stronger. Not only is the question, why is Rashi combining them when in the sages, in the classics, they're written separately. Rashi himself quotes 2 out of these 3 earlier as standalones. So it's clear that even from Rashi's thinking, they're not necessarily one and the same. They don't have to be a package deal. So why suddenly does Rashi decide to package them? And by the same token, the question is further, if Rashi already said 2 out of the 3, why does he repeat them? And even though we find that at times Rashi does repeat something that he wrote in his earlier commentary, especially if it's in a prior book in the Torah, as we're going to see, one of these 3 exists in a prior Rashi, in a prior book, in the book of Numbers. Item B is in the book of Numbers. So that's not such a strong question why it's repeated, because when something comes up in a later book, in a later sefer, sometimes Rashi does repeat it to refresh the student's memory. But still the question would then be, but when he does repeat it just to jog the memory, typically he will write it short. And here he writes it with the full-blown length, as he did in the book of Numbers. And certainly the other one, which is item A, which is brought in an earlier Rashi, and not in a prior book, in last week's portion. So this is the general question. On the next screen, I'm going to take it apart in detail, exactly what the question is. It has a lot of minutia, and it lines up to be a number of questions. But this is the general principle. Rashi has this long Rashi with A, B, and C. Why is he putting them together? They're not together in the writings of our sages. They're in 3 different places. And why does he choose to combine them and in this place? Including the question is that Rashi himself quotes 2 out of these 3 in prior Rashis in different places. And why, again, does he decide to repeat those and combine them here? So let's go further and let's analyze all of this in more detail. So what you have now on the screen, this is the only other screen that I'm going to put up, because it has really all the details of the Sicha. I just want to center it the best way possible. Let's see if I'm going to have some mazel. Okay. We're going to use this to analyze. The reason why I did this is because the Sicha, while it's very, very clear and concise and perfect, there's a lot of back and forth of references to various Rashis and various Medrashim in the Gemara on various psukim, on various verses in the Torah. And those verses are important to the Rebbe's analysis, to the Rebbe's question and answer. And therefore it was important to lay it out. So after giving it thought, I decided to do it this way, to do it in the order of the Parshas. So in Parshas Pinchas, which is in the book of Numbers, as mentioned earlier in Bamidbar, over there is where Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded to place his hand upon Yehoshua and appoint him. Right there, Rashi says that God told him to provide him a spokesman during your lifetime, etc. Similar language to what we have here. That you should put your hand. Moshe put his hand on him, and God told him to do so. And Rashi says that Hashem told him, give him a spokesman during your lifetime. In order that's what the etc. is. In order that the people shouldn't later say, aha, while your teacher was alive, you didn't pick up your head. Suddenly you're a macha, you're picking up your head, and that's why you should give it to him now. That's already in Parshas Pinchas. By the way, one of the Rebbe's question is that since already in Parshas Pinchas, which was a while back, Moshe was told by Hashem to appoint a spokesman, and of course he listened to Hashem, so he appointed a spokesman a while back, definitely a few months back, because Pinchas is before the beginning of Devarim. Devarim is 5 weeks before Moshe's passing, so let's assume that Pinchas happened at least 5 or 6 weeks or more before Moshe's passing. And Moshe already appointed a spokesman to Yeshua. Why? How do we know? Because Hashem told him to. As it says there, put your hand on him, and Rashi explains that placing your hand on him means to get him a spokesman. In our language, give him a pulpit, give him a microphone, give him a platform so he can start to teach now. So why does Rashi say now? In our Rashi, which is right here, in our Parsha Haazinu, which is 5, 6 at least weeks later, that Moshe appointed a spokesman. I don't understand. That was done a long time ago. This is old news. But let's go back to our order. Let's take this slow. So we have that Pinchas, that's the first reference to something that's found in our Rashi. Our Rashi is here in the middle of the screen, and I have the A, B, and C that we're already familiar with from last screen. And notice that the B is right here in Pinchas. Everything on the screen here are things that are found in different Rashis and teachings of the sages that are also collected in this Rashi to help us ask the Rebbe's questions like, why are they all here? So then we go into Parshas Vayelech. You have in front of you 3 verses from Parshas Vayelech. This is right at the beginning of Parshas Vayelech. This is somewhere in the middle. And this is our current verse, which is very close to the end. Oops, that's not Vayelech. This is Haazinu. This is Haazinu. Oops, that's a big mistake. Okay, I'm glad I realized that. This makes it much sweeter, actually. Okay, so this is, the first 2 are the beginning of Vayelech and the middle of Vayelech. You can see the chapter and verse. This is 31:2. This is 31:14, and it's a very short parshas. And then this is Haazinu, our current verse. So let's study them. In the beginning of Vayelech, the verse says that Moshe says to the people, I can no longer come and go, because Hashem said I won't cross the Yarden. And the explanation of coming and going, is explaining in Rashi, is that I can't teach Torah. I can no longer continue with my role. Why not? Because Hashem said I won't cross the Yarden. Says the Sifri, the Medrash, on that verse, Moshe provided Yeshua a spokesman to teach in his lifetime, lest the people say in your teacher's lifetime you didn't speak, and now you're speaking. So the Sifri says it right there on that verse. So the question is going to be, why doesn't Rashi say it right there on that verse? Why doesn't he follow the lead of his source, the Medrash? Rashi does say something in that verse. Rashi says authority was being transferred from one to the other, which, if you notice, that reflects our Rashi. In our Rashi, that's the item A. In our Rashi, that's the item A. It was a Shabbos of a pair. Authority was transferred from one to the other. That message is already in the beginning of Vayelech in a Rashi. However, it's only the second half of that. There's got to be a reason. I don't know if other Mefarshim of Rashi do what the Rebbe does and to pay such attention. Just analyzing the Rashi A. Rashi A makes 2 statements. Oops, it's already found in a previous Rashi, and not so long ago. It's last parsha. And not the whole A, just the second half. So why is that there? But that's the first reference. That's in the beginning of Vayelech. Then you have the middle of Vayelech. The pasuk says that Hashem told Moshe, call Yehoshua and come down to the temple. Bring him down to the Yoel Mo, to the temple meeting, and I need to give him some instructions because he's taking over. And the pasuk says, "Vayelech Moshe v'Yeshua b'Etz Yatzeh b'Ohel Moed." That Moshe and Yeshua went and they stood there as they were commanded. Says the Gemara, there's no Rashi on that verse in this connection. Says the Gemara, it was a Shabbos of a pair. Authority was transferred from one to the other. That's the source in our sages to the beginning of item A, to item A in our Rashi. Okay. There's incidentally a Rashi on that Gemara. When it says the word a pair, Shabbos of a pair, divzigi, Rashi translates friends. Friends. And the reason is because really the Gemara is explaining that the authority was transferred from one to the other, not that they were leaders at the same time. It was a transfer of leadership. In the morning, Moshe was the leader. By the time the day was out, in the afternoon, Yeshua took over. So it wasn't really a peer. They weren't leaders together, but they were peer in the sense of friends. And therefore, Rashi on the Gemara makes that point to say that the divzigi doesn't really mean zugais, a pair. It really means chaverim, friends. And the Rebbe is going to be curious. It's going to be one of the Rebbe's questions. How come Rashi here doesn't explain that problem? If it's a problem to a student of Gemara, it's certainly a problem in a student of Chumash, which is much more literal. And if there's a problem with the word zugish, peer, that it's not correct because they weren't leaders together, but rather there was a transfer of leadership from the morning to the afternoon, so much so that Rashi, even on the Gemara level student, has to explain that it doesn't mean zugos, pairs, but it means chaberim, friends. That there was two leaders, but not at the same time. So he should have said it in Chumash, and Rashi does not say it in our Rashi. That's going to be a further problem. And then we come to our Rashi in Haazinu. And the verse says, Moshe came and spoke to the people, him and Hoshea ben Nun. Here we have the Medrash. The Medrash says, although he was appointed leader, this is why Yeshua was called Hoshea, says the Medrash here, Sifri, he still maintained his righteousness. Then we have our Rashi. This is our Rashi. A, B, and C, as we said before earlier. A, Rashi tells us that it was a Shabbos, a pair, that authority is transferred from one to the other. B, Rashi says, Moshe provided you a spokesman that people shouldn't say, in your teacher's lifetime, you didn't raise your head up. And C, why is he called Hoshea here? Because he didn't become proud, he remained humble. So again, we're going to reiterate and explain with full clarity the Rebbe's questions. Before we go through the list of 1 through 6, actually, let's do it in the order of 1 through 6. The first question is, why combine 3 separate teachings of Chazal of our sages, and why repeat them? Repeat 2 from previous Rashis. This question we already discussed on the prior screen. We're combining 3 separate teachings from our sages, and we're also copying and pasting 2 prior Rashis. So now you see exactly what they are. A is a Shabbos of a pair, is sourced in the Gemara on a different verse. Last week's Parsha. So why is A here? Why is this part of Rashi here? He should copy the Gemara and put it in Vayelech over there. That's the first question. I'm sorry, that's about A. What about B? Moshe provided a spokesman for Joshua in his lifetime. That's found in the beginning of Vayelech in a Medrash. Put it there. That's the reason why the Medrash put it there. Because Moshe said, I no longer can teach Torah, no longer can come and go. So the Medrash says, he's starting to give over authority. So why didn't Rashi put it there? If Rashi feels it's important to say it, put it there. He waits an entire Parsha. And C, this number C, why is he called Hoshea? This is actually, this is found in the Medrash here. This is found in the Medrash on our pasuk. I wrote it very short, but the Sifri writes it similar to Rashi. Why is he called Hosea? Because even though he was appointed leader, he maintained his righteousness. So this actually is not a problem. C belongs here. So from the Rebbe's perspective, the Rashi should have just been C. Because that's the problem that arises here. Torah says that Moshe came and taught to the people, him together with Hosea ben Nun. That's a problem perhaps in a pshat level. Why are we changing his name back to Hosea? Rashi should explain the way the Medrash does on this same verse. You know why? Because here he was appointed to leadership. He became a big shot, and he didn't become arrogant. He remained humble like Hosea, like his youth. So the C makes sense. But the A and the B, theoretically they belong. Like I said, the A belongs in Vayelech 31:14. The A belongs in Vayelech 31:14, a Shabbos of Pir. Why? Because that's where the Gemara puts it. The Gemara says it on that verse. And you know why the Gemara says it on that verse? Because that's the first time where the Torah refers to Moshe and Yeshua standing together in this connection. That's the first time where it's mentioned in the Chumash that Moshe and Yeshua went to speak to Hashem together. Aha! They must have, that was the moment of the transference of power. So the Gemara says on that verse, it was a Shabbos of Pir. Rashi should have said it on that verse, and he doesn't. He says nothing on that verse. To add insult to injury, Rashi does mention the transference of power, but not on chapter 31, verse 14, where the Gemara says it. He mentions it on chapter 31, verse 2. But only mentions the transference of power. He doesn't mention the Shabbos of Pir. So this is like a whole puzzle. Like Rashi takes the puzzle and takes it apart and puts it seemingly in random places. And then the B part that Moshe provided a spokesman, etc., that is brought in the Sifri, in the Medrash, not on this pasuk, way back in the beginning of last week's Parasha Vayelech. And as we said, why would the Medrash bring it there? It makes sense. That's where Moshe said, I can no longer come and go, meaning to say, my leadership time is coming to an end. Why? Because I got Hashem told me crossing the Yarden. It's time to give it over. So the Midrash says how he started to give over the leadership. He gave Yeshua, a spokesman, a platform. So why does Rashi wait till here? What happened here that triggers Rashi? Remember, his sources are the Medrash and the Gemara. He didn't make this stuff up. We only know it from Torah Shabbat Peh. It was orally handed down from Moshe all the way down to the Sifri and to the Gemara. So if you're quoting them, quote them in the same place. Because presumably, unless you have an argument against it, presumably that's the verse which triggers this need for this commentary. Unless, as the Rebbe is going to teach us, of course, that on the Rashi level of study, no, it belongs exactly where Rashi puts it, because the Rashi level of study is not identical to the Sifri, which is Midrashic, or the Gemara, which is, let's call it halachic. Rashi's level is pshat, to explain the actual text. So it's going to have to make sense that this Rashi is only needed here, and it's not needed earlier. So the whole thing has to be pieced together. So let's go through the questions. So the first one is, why combine three separate teachings and repeating two of them from previous Rashis? Question 2, the A. I'm just delineating now in detail in the 6 questions, that which we already discussed now orally. Why does Rashi bring A, his comment A? Why does he bring it here and in the beginning of Vayelech, and not in the middle of Vayelech, as in the Gemara? It's fascinating. Rashi brings this message of the transference of power. He brings it twice, in the beginning of Vayelech and in Haazinu. But the Gemara actually brings it not in that place nor in that place, but somewhere in between, as you see on the screen. It's bothersome to the Rebbe. It's telling. It's here to tell us something. The Rebbe's not looking to make questions. He's looking to us to really analyze why Rashi does it when. 3, this this same statement of A that Rashi says. Why does Rashi cut it in half in the beginning of Vayelech? It's there, but it's only half, only the second half of that A. Question 4. This is a nuanced question that we didn't discuss yet, or we did touch on it. That this A part, Rashi says it was Shabbos shel dibzigi, a Shabbos of pear. In the Gemara, which is Rashi's source, Rashi explains that pairs does not mean really peers, zivug, which would mean two at the same time, but rather it means chavedim, friends. Because Rashi is explaining that Moshe and Yeshua were not leaders at the same time. That's not really what's done. They were just leaders on the same day. One started the day and one ended the day. So Rashi felt a need to explain to the student of Gemara that dibzigi, pair here, is just a reference to chaverim, friends. It doesn't literally mean pair. So why doesn't Rashi say it here? Why is he silent here? If this is a question to the student of the Gemara, it's certainly a question to the student of Chumash, which is much more literal. How could you tell a student of Chumash that Moshe and Yeshua were dibzigi, were joint leaders? You have to explain it that it doesn't mean joint. It means actually chaverim, friends, successive leaders on the same day. And Rashi's silent. Very strong question to the Rebbe. And then 5 and 6 is interesting stuff. And this is the way the Rebbe presents it. He doesn't present these in his list of questions, but the Rebbe presents this as the key to the Rebbe's explanation, which very often happens in the Sichas. That the Rebbe says, let's look at the Rashi as compared to his source, and we'll see some nuanced differences. And that will be the key to what Rashi is doing and why. In comment C, which Rashi brings down, which is quoted from the Sifri. What's comment C, right? Let's look at Rashi in comment C. Why is he called Hosea? Because he didn't become proud after being appointed to greatness. Rather, he remained humble. Actually, this is supposed to be B. Okay. I'm sorry, let's start with B. Comment B, Moshe provided Yeshua a spokesman in his lifetime, so people shouldn't say, in your teacher's lifetime, you didn't raise your head. Compare that B to its source in the Medrash. Where is the source in the Medrash? Sifri, way on the top of the screen in Vayelech 31:2. Seems to say the same thing. Moshe provided Yeshua a spokesman so he can teach in his lifetime. Aha, says the Rebbe, no. In Sifri, it says so he can teach. Here it says so he can lift his head. In Sifri, it says that people will say in your teacher's lifetime you didn't speak, and now you're speaking. Rashi doesn't say that. He quote-unquote misquotes the Sifri and changes it just enough. In your teacher's lifetime, you didn't raise your head. Why would Rashi change? He literally changes the Medrash when he quotes it. It's something about raising a head rather than being more so about teaching. The Medrash says the language that you will teach and you didn't speak and now you're going to speak. But Rashi speaks about it in the fact of lifting your head. And again, it's very strongly emphasized. It's like it should be in bold in Rashi because those are things that he actually innovates and deviates from the source. So clearly he's trying to make his point with that change. And then you have in section C of Rashi, why is he called Hosea? Because he didn't become proud, but he remained humble. Well, if you look into Sifri, which is the source of Rashi, it doesn't say anything about humble. It doesn't say the word humble. It says, although he was appointed leader, he maintained his righteousness. It says the word righteousness there, tzidkai, 3 times, 3 times. It speaks about the fact that even though he became a leader, he remained righteous, which maybe that's an allusion to humility, but clearly what it says there is b'tzidkai, just like he always was. Back in the day, in his youth, Hosea bin Nun, he remained righteous. Why does Rashi change and write that he remained humble? Remain humble. So Rashi is trying to show something by these deviations, and these are questions 5 and 6. Sifri says didn't speak and now he speaks. Rashi says raised his head. Sifri says maintained his righteousness. Rashi says he remained humble. So the Rebbe is going to explain all of these things. And there's a main key here. The main key is clearly what's happening in this whole Rashi and everything that you see here on the screen is that Hashem is beginning to transfer leadership from Moshe to Yeshua. That's obvious. That's happening in all of these quotes. But there's two steps in that. There's two types of transferences of leadership. There's one that you start appointing him. There's two steps in the appointing, let's call it, of his successor. There's one is I'm appointing him as my successor, but not for now, for later. For later. You appoint him as your successor for later. You start to groom him. And the other would be, the other possibility and the other setup will be that you're actually appointing him as a successor now. And as we're going to see, that becomes the differences between the various Rashis and the various verses. And sometimes when it speaks about Yeshua stepping into the role and transferring power, etc., and having a spokesman, we're speaking about it because we're grooming him, we're preparing him for the future. It's not such a distant future, but it's a future. So we're appointing, we're getting ready. And in some cases, Rashi's message is that this is actually happening. He is now a leader. And that's why Rashi has to repeat, and it makes sense. So let's start, for example, right from the top. In the portion of Pinchas, which we said is at least 5 weeks before Moshe's passing. Because Moshe's passing, because the beginning of the Chumash Devarim is 5 weeks before Moshe's passing, Rosh Chodesh Shvat. This is Pinchas, a few portions earlier. Let's assume it's at least 5 weeks before. Maybe it's longer. Rashi says that Moshe was told by Hashem, give him a spokesman during your lifetime. He did it right away, clearly. So Yeshua had already a spokesman. He wasn't the leader at all. Nevertheless, we're grooming him for the future. Whereas, as we're going to see, when Rashi seems to copy and paste that same commentary in our Rashi, which is item number B in our Rashi, this is not speaking about appoint him a spokesman so he could start to teach Torah. So that the people say, oh, he's also a teacher. He's also a Pesat Talmid Chacham. No. Appoint him a spokesman because that's what a leader has. That's what the Nasi has because he's now becoming the Nasi. It's very different. As we're going to see, the Rebbe is going to prove as we go. The Rebbe is going to prove that that's what Rashi is proving. So then we come to the beginning of Vayelech. The Torah says at the beginning of Vayelech, Moshe says, I can no longer come and go, which we explained and Rashi explained to mean, I'm no longer going to be able to teach you Torah. And Rashi and the Sifri says that Moshe appointed a spokesman. So he should start to teach. But that is not making yet Yeshua the current leader. That's similar to the Pinchas. That's similar to the Pinchas. That Moshe appointed a Joshua spokesman for the future. Joshua has to have a spokesman. He should get ready. He should learn how to be a public speaker. He should learn how to teach. But not because he's now the new Nasi, but because that's coming. How does the Rebbe know this? Because that's what it says in the text. Moshe says, I can no longer come and go. You know why? I can no longer be your teacher and your leader because Hashem said I won't cross the Yarden. Aha! So we're preparing for after crossing of the Yarden. Right now I'm still your leader. But because I can't cross the Yarden, so I will not be able to be your leader in a very short term. And therefore, we appoint a spokesman. And Rashi says that authority was being transferred from one to the other. This too is futuristic. It's not saying that when it was transferred, it wasn't transferred that day, that time. This is the morning of the day of Moshe's passing. Moshe's saying authority is going to be getting ready to be transferred. It didn't yet happen. Why is it getting ready to be transferred? Because I can't continue to be a leader. Why not? Because I can't cross the Jordan. Aha! So that you'll have a leader when you cross the Jordan, I'm going to start transferring authority. Says the Rebbe, there's no need for Rashi to say that this is a Shabbos of Pir. Remember we asked the question? Rashi only says half of item A in that instance. The authority was transferred. He doesn't say it was a Shabbos of Pir, because it wasn't. At that point, we don't yet see them serving together. Moshe is still the full leader. However, he better set somebody up because he can't cross the Jordan. The future might be the next day, that afternoon, it doesn't matter. And because it has to be done for the future, so the Rashi says authority is being transferred. We're getting ready for the transferring of power. Yeshua, stand in the on-deck circle in the baseball lingo. Get ready, you're next. But not that he had a Shabbos appear. They're not standing together. Moshe is the only leader. So Rashi doesn't say anything about that. There's no need for it. It's not happening now. It's laying the groundwork for the future. Again, very similar to what he says back in Pinchas. We're getting ready. We're going to have a spokesman. You can start to teach. But not that the spokesman represents that you're the current Moshe Rabbeinu. We're getting ready to transfer power, but not that you already have it. Then we come to the middle of Vayelech. And the Torah says Moshe and Yeshua went and stood by the Mishkan. So on the Gemara level, the Gemara is not about literal. On the Gemara level, the Torah mentioned Moshe and Yeshua standing together. This is already a message that they were a pair. Authority was transferred from one to the other. But on the Rashi level, you see, where does it say here anything about them sharing leadership? Rashi is very true to teaching Pshat, the literal meaning. The literal meaning is very simple. Hashem said to Moshe, go get Yeshua, bring him so I can give him instructions. He's the next guy up. He's the next batter. He's the next leader. So Moshe did what he was told. He brought Yeshua and they went and stood there. To do what? To be a Shabbos of Pir. To tell him what's going to happen in the future. Again, this is futuristic. So in the Gemara, it says it, because the Gemara operates on a different level than Pshat, plus the Gemara also speaking futuristic. Look at the Rashi on the Gemara. Rashi makes the point to say that Shabbos appear doesn't really mean that they were leaders together. It means that they were friends, that day they will both be leaders, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. But they weren't yet leaders together. Where do you get that should be leaders together? The pasuk simply says that Hashem said, bring Yeshua, I got to talk to him. So Moshe and Yeshua went and stood there. Does it say anything about them being leaders together? It says everything about Hashem's instructions for the preparation of an upcoming transference of power. So that's what the Gemara says. Authority was transferred that day, but not at the same time. And Shabbos appeared doesn't mean that they were both at the same time, and that's why Rashi feels the need in the Gemara to explain that zivzigi, pair doesn't mean pair at the same time, it means friends. One in the morning, one in the afternoon, again, because it's still futuristic. It's still laying the ground, we're still preparing. And therefore Rashi doesn't say anything. This is one of the big questions the Rebbe had, which was question 2. Why didn't Rashi follow the Gemara's model? And on that verse that we're highlighting here, which is the first time Moshe and Yeshua are mentioned together, Rashi should have said his whole business, his A and his B, about this whole transference and the whole peering thing. Rashi should have done it right there, following the Gemara's model. Said the Rebbe, it says Moshe's name and Yeshua together, but it says nowhere that they were leaders together. They were simply following Hashem's instruction to come down and talk with Hashem about the future leadership. And even the Gemara, which is not Pshat, but even the Gemara, which says that it was a Shabbos of Pir, transference of authority, Rashi makes the point on the Gemara to say that it wasn't really Pir. They weren't really leaders together. It's not divzigi in the simple sense of zugim of Pir. It's really chaverim. It's two people, but not at the same time. When we come to our pasuk in Haazinu, and the pasuk says that Moshe came by Yadava Yabo, Moshe by Yadaber Elam, and he spoke to people Divrei Hashira Hazais, the words of the Shira, which basically means Haazinu and everything Hashem told him and a whole instruction. Then the pasuk says, Hu Hoshea ben Nun, him and Hoshea ben Nun. This is a big problem in Pshat. What's Hoshea doing here? Moshe is speaking to the people. Moshe is giving a sermon. He's giving a teaching Torah. He's giving the Shittas Haazinu, whatever it encompasses, or the whole Chumash Devarim, whatever it is that he said. He's teaching Torah to the people. Oh, not alone. Him and Hoshea ben Nun. Really? Why is Hoshea ben Nun suddenly joining the drasha? And he's also giving the sermon. Did it say somewhere in the pasuk that Hashem said that he should do it? Why is he here? This doesn't make sense. Before, when Hashem said, do me a favor, call Yeshua and come, I got to talk to both of you. Yes, they went. But the Moshe came and spoke to the people, the words of Devarim, the words of Haazinu, whatever it is that he gave over. Him and Hoshea ben Nun, this is a big problem in Pshutei Shal Mikra, in the literal study of text. How does Yeshua come in here? We know he's the next guy, and we know we have to be encouraged. And Hashem told him Chazak ve'amatz, and Moshe told him Chazak ve'amatz, and Hashem gave him instructions. Don't be afraid. But Moshe is speaking, Yeshua speaking together with him. Like, what's that about? So here Rashi has to explain it. So here Rashi says, quoting the Gemara, but using it in a much more literal way. It was Shabbos Shel Divzigi. It was a Shabbos. I guess it happened to be a Shabbos. A Shabbos of a pair. Authority is transferred from one to the other. Says the Rebbe, Rashi means quite literally that on that day there were actually two leaders. He doesn't say what he says in Gemara, that Divzigi doesn't mean literally Divzigi pair, but it means friends. One in the morning, one in the afternoon. No. It means since the Torah says that Moshe and Yeshua both gave the drasha that day, both of them taught the whole Shira, whatever that message was. That means they were both the leaders. It was a joint authority with two leaders that day. Fascinating. Shabbos Shel Divzigi. He uses the Gemara, the Chazal, but he explains it literally. There's a reason why Chazal did the word Divzigi, because they knew that on the Pshat level, it's actually a pair. Authority is transferred one to the other, not in the morning and the afternoon. Together. It was transferred in the sense that right now they both carry the authority. That's the only way to explain why Moshe and Yeshua are both giving the speech. It's perfection and precision. So then Rashi comes and does B. And he brings in the whole thing of Moshe providing a spokesman in his lifetime. Now, this is again a Rashi that we already know from Parshas Pinchas. Says the Rebbe, no, it's a whole different business. In Parshas Pinchas, the spokesman, Moshe was told, I want you to start giving shiurim. I want people to know about you, but not that you're a nasi. Here, Rashi repeats that. And he says he provided him as a spokesman, like a nasi has a spokesman. Who would have a spokesman? Who would have a meturgamon? The nasi. So everybody can hear him. So Rashi re-quotes that from his source in the Medrash and re-quotes it from himself in Parshas Pinchas, because here's a whole different meaning. Here, spokesman means you are a nasi, equal to Moshe now. So it has to be repeated, and it's repeated here, because this is another source in Chazal, in our sages, to the fact that there was actually dual leadership. That's what a meturgaman was. The person who's the nasi has a meturgaman, has that spokesperson. So now we know why A is here and nowhere else in Rashi, and why B follows it. It's another source in Chazal for this concept of dual leadership. It's like innovative. It's a chiddush. We don't have dual leadership in the Gemara. The Gemara speaks about leadership half day, half day. Rashi says, no, it means literal dual. So then the question, so why does C come in? So the question is a question though. Why in Taka did Hashem make such a thing that there should be dual leadership? The principle is dabar echad lader. A nasi is only one at a time. A nasi is always one at a time. A nasi is only one. It's a thing that the Rabbi said many times in the name of the Rabbeim. A nasi is not einer. The whole concept of a nasi is that there's one. And this is how it was throughout history. Suddenly, by the first transference of Nesias, of leadership from Moshe to Yeshua, there was a day that there were two leaders. It's contrary to the concept, to the principle of dabar echad lader. There's one leader. So this is problematic. Why would you do it? So the answer is, that's why it brings in B, really. Because Yeshua, and this is because Yeshua, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted that Yeshua should have a spokesman so that people shouldn't say you couldn't raise your head. Remember we said that Rashi deviates from the Sifri. The Sifri says that in the day of your teacher you couldn't speak. Rashi says you couldn't raise your head. Yeshua had a problem working against him. That he was very humble. He was known as Moshe's faithful servant. He wasn't the spokesman, he wasn't teaching. Aaron, for example, was very well known, and he was teaching, and he had influence. He's one of the big mashpiyim, even though he wasn't the Rebbe. But he was out there. He was making farbrengens. Aaron, we know when Moshe would teach Torah, Aaron would teach it over to the people. He was himself an important person. Yeshua, his whole model in the life of Moshe was that he didn't say a word. He was just right there with Moshe like he was Moshe's shadow. Complete bittul, complete nullification to Moshe. He didn't say a word. So the problem is going to be that someone who's so humble and now he's in the second, he's given the job of a nasi, he's not going to be able to raise his head. That's really why Rashi brings B after A. Not only was the idea that Moshe and Yeshua spoke together, because it's indicating, as we said earlier, that in the pshat of the text, there were two teachers that day. Why did it have to be? It's against the principle of only one at a time. The answer is no, it was two teachers. He gave him a spokesman. He acted like he's another Moshe Rabbeinu. You know why? Why did it have to do such a thing? Because otherwise people can say, you don't raise your head. Yeshua wasn't the head raising type. He was the head bowing type. He was completely nullified. You didn't notice him. Rashi deviates. The Medrash doesn't say about raising head. The Medrash is saying, till now you didn't speak, now you speak. That's appropriate when he appoints the spokesman earlier for the future. I want you to start speaking so people can get to know you, that you know some Torah. But now we're not speaking about teaching Torah, we're talking about raising your head, becoming a leader with a spokesman of your own, and you're like another Moshe Rabbeinu. This is so opposite Yeshua's nature, and people will say it doesn't suit him. He doesn't have the charisma. He doesn't have the shtel. That's why this concept had to be done, that there should be two leaders at the same time, which is against the principle that there's only one leader. Says the Rebbe, that flows right into C. What does it say in C? Why does he call him here, Hosea? Not just why he calls him Hosea. Why, of all places, here? Aha! Because here is the place where the Torah explicitly states that Hosea ben Nun gave the drasha together with Moshe. He was publicly appointed as, let's call it, an equal to Moshe Rabbeinu. And we just said, what's the reason for that? Because he's by Teva, by nature. And by history, he was very humble, and just a sidekick, he was mamish, not anything of his own. And now he's being brought to the pulpit, and he's equal to Moshe Rabbeinu, so to speak. Says the Torah. Exactly in this place where he's giving appointed to greatness, that's where the Torah is calling him Hosea, to say, yeah, he still didn't become proud. He was told to lift his head, he lifted his head. He became a leader with the whole stolz, with the whole strength. Not a problem. But pride? No. We don't even mean pride in a way of arrogance, which is treif. Even a sense of pride, a sense of giving himself some credit that he's something. No, none of that. Leadership, strength, of course. And as we know, Yeshua right away started with a strong leadership. And he told the people, chazak ve'amatza, and everything else. Yeah, but pride, no. And now the whole Rashi makes sense. So in short, Even though these three, A, B, and C, are brought in different places in Rashi, different places in Midrashim, and all the other places, they mean prepare the groundwork for the future. He will become a leader. He will need to learn how to publicly speak and how to teach Torah. He will need to transfer authority in the future or the end of the day. But in this pasuk, it's the only place where the text forces Rashi to say that Moshe and Yeshua together came and taught Torah. I must tell you, before I learned the Sicha, which is this week, whenever I read that verse, and I'm familiar with the verse, I'm a Bal Koreh. When I read that verse, I understood it to mean this, that Moshe came and spoke to the people, and him and Yeshua ben Nun, that he came with Yeshua, not that he spoke. But that's not what it says. It says in the pasuk, and Moshe came and spoke to the people together with Yeshua. So they both spoke. The answer is yes. And that's why you have a whole Rashi. It's a Shabbos of pair, I'm just recapping, and that's it's a Shabbos of pair, literal pair, not like in the Gemara where it's translated by Rashi to mean friends. One in the morning, one in the afternoon. No, they're pair, they're dual leaders. Authority is transferred, says Rashi. Not like Rashi says in the beginning of Vayelech, authority will be transferred morning and afternoon. It's being transferred right now by dual leadership. B, Moshe provided a spokesman. Not like he said in Pinchas, providing a spokesman so he should start grooming him as a teacher of Torah for the future. He provided a spokesman because like a Nasi has a spokesman. And not like the Medrash says that people should know that that you should be able to speak. No, it's about raising the head. Otherwise, why would you have two leaders at the same time, which is against the Torah principle of only one? The answer is because it's about raising the head. We have an issue to overcome. Yeshua's humility, Yeshua's nature, and his whole persona was that I'm nothing. And now he has to raise his head. So Rashi deviates from his source to make that point. And at the same time, Rashi says, not just Rashi, the Chumash itself, in this same pasuk, when it speaks about Yeshua giving the joint speech together with Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah changes his name to Asher ben Nun, because he's lifting his head. He's becoming a Nasi, but he's remaining without any pride. So we answered all of the questions. The Rebbe concludes by saying that the lesson is that when a person succeeds in making a difference and becoming a leader and being successful, the Rebbe says this is a lesson for every one of us. That when a person merits something of greatness, or something of leadership, or something of any success, tremendous brachas, so he could think that maybe there's something special about me. Not that he'll become arrogant. Arrogance is treif. But we're talking just a feeling of being proud in a kosher way. The Rebbe uses the word harchaves hadas. He'll feel very, good about himself. Wow, if I was successful to become a leader, to make a difference, whatever it might be, it must be that there's something special about me. And I feel special. Doesn't have to be in an arrogant way, says the Rebbe. That is not okay. Yeshua teaches us that no, that a person has to avoid even that. He has to take the role. If you have opportunity for leadership, which the Rebbe is saying that every one of us is a leader in our home, in our community, in our businesses, in our mitzvahim, whatever it is, we're all supposed to be leaders. So leadership, yes, we have to lift up our heads and take the position with strength and clarity and focus. Not false humility, that's not okay. But at the same time, there shouldn't be an element of, I must be a good person, I must be something special. That is not okay. Yeshua says a Yid could do better than that. It's the two extremes. He has the strength, he's raising his head, but total humility. And the Rebbe says, in fact, that will make you a vessel for success in this, whatever it is, that mission of leadership or success that Hashem is granting you to accomplish. If it doesn't get to your head, even in a little bit, that you feel this harchaves hadas, this feeling of, I must be okay, I must be something special. If you avoid that, you'll be more successful, because now you're a vessel to Hashem's blessings, because it's not about you, and it can flow, which is a high level, if you ask me, that the Rebbe connects this concept of leadership and bittul, it goes together with Rosh Hashanah, which is when we read the parsha, because Rosh Hashanah we make Hashem king. That's a tremendous role. And it could start, a Jew could feel, wow, I make Hashem king, I must be something special. But we know that we make Hashem king through bittul. The whole theme of Rosh Hashanah is Kabbalah Sale, and we're saying Tillim, and we're blowing the shofar. It's all about bittul, bittul, bittul. I got nothing. Because, that's the vessel, the vehicle to accomplish the greatest things. What's the greatest thing? Making Hashem king. Wow. The vehicle to accomplishing the greatest thing, the greatest leadership, the greatest accomplishment is dafka, the idea of bittul, that it's not about me and it bypasses me. I can't resist. To see in this the Rebbe's leadership and the transference of the Rebbe's leadership from the Frierdiker Rebbe to the Rebbe. I'm certainly not an authority in that subject, but I can't resist to point out that this is exactly what it was. I'm not saying that both of them were leaders at the same time. The Rebbe would not have that, because the Rebbe spoke clearly that there's dabar echad la doir, and there's never a concept of a Rebbe is not einer. However, it's known that the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe to write svarim, Hayom Yom, and other things, the Shimas HaMenorah, years before, and the Rebbe the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe that people should ask him questions, and so often send people to the Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe, also if you read the Rishimis, the Rebbe's personal diary, the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe, I want you to learn how to speak. I want you to get used to the concept of public speaking, whatever that means for our Rebbe, that you should speak publicly and prepare your thoughts so that people should understand it. How do you relate to that? To me, because our Rebbe, like Yeshua ben Nun was to Moshe Rabbeinu, look at all the pictures and videos of the Rebbe standing with the Frierdiker Rebbe. There's nobody there. Complete bittul. It's not like he's something. He stood like a stone, like a mannequin, like a servant, like with a fear. And the Rebbe knew who he was. He was a giant of giants. He stood like mamish nothing. Like you can envision Yeshua Moshe Rabbeinu. He doesn't move. As people testified later, even when the Rebbe would have the meals in the house of the Frierdiker Rebbe, after the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, the Rebbe sat at the table. He wouldn't talk a lot. He wouldn't expand. He wouldn't fabring. He would sit like he sat in time of Frierdiker Rebbe. He would sit up in the chair because the Frierdiker Rebbe's chair was there, even though the Frierdiker Rebbe wasn't physically there. And only when he went downstairs would he fabring. The bittul of the Rebbe is obvious. The Rebbe sat on the chair that way by the Fabringen for all the 40 plus years of his Nesias. He never sat back. He never got comfortable in the seat. He had the attitude of Yeshua. Perhaps that's why he was such a Rebbe. Perhaps because he was the greatest bittul. But strength? Absolutely. The greatest strength. This is my own little Torah. But I'm sharing it because I think that's maybe why the Rebbe told us this. I don't know. He also wants us in our small way that he made us all leaders. We're shlochim, we're mashpiyim, we're going on mivtzayim. The Rebbe made every Lubavitcher into a leader. But we should try to maintain that balance, to recognize that the leadership is just to be the antenna, to be the mannequin, not that it's something because I'm a special person. Because then why is it not good? First of all, it's not good, it's not true. But also because then it limits the success that you can have. But the nasi of our day, the day that every year has to become a leader, there wasn't such a concept in the past. There wasn't such a concept so much of shluchim. The Rebbe says that every year is a shliach. Certainly every chassid is a shliach. He's making us all leaders. So to my thinking, the nasi of our day models the success of what does leadership mean? Total bittul. And in the sense of the way the Sicha describes it. To a degree, the Rebbe was becoming a leader already in the time of the Frierdiker Rebbe, by the instruction of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And yet, Moshe ben Nun, there's nobody home. There's no him about it. He remained the same humble. And that's continued after Yud Shvat all the way. Never changed. So what could you say except Ashreinu Matev Chalkeinu?